He was the golden face of American cinema, a heartthrob, a director, a legend. But behind Robert Redford's piercing eyes and timeless charm was a man haunted by memories. Some men entered his life through film. Others through friendship. A few became icons beside him. And at least one was lost too soon. As Redford grew older and the cameras dimmed, he carried with him not just awards, but 6 unforgettable men whose names echoed in every corner of his story. Before death ever knocked, he spoke of them, not with regret, but with reverence. These were the 6 men Robert Redford could never get over, long before red carpets and Lifetime Achievement Awards, before the Sundance Film Festival and political headlines. There was just Robert Redford, a young man with ambition, charm, and an aching desire to matter. And then there was Paul Newman. When their paths crossed in 1969 on the set of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, something electric happened. Not just between their characters, but between 2 men who would become something rare in Hollywood, brothers, without blood, rivals, without ego. At first, Redford was unsure. He was still clawing his way up the ladder while Newman was already an icon, known for those ocean blue eyes and the kind of swagger that didn't need explaining. Studios didn't want Redford in the film. Newman had the power, the fame, the box office draw. But Paul fought for him. He saw something deeper in Redford, a vulnerability beneath the grit, an actor who didn't just perform but lived inside his characters. It was Newman who demanded that Redford play the Sundance Kid. And just like that, Robert's life changed forever. From that point on, they were inseparable on screen and deeply connected off it. There was no jealousy, no bitterness. They laughed like brothers, argued like old war veterans, and leaned on each other when life grew heavy. When they reunited a few years later in The Sting, it wasn't just another hit, it was a confirmation that their chemistry wasn't luck. It was something real. Something the world could feel, but only they truly understood. But what made their bond so powerful wasn't fame. It was loyalty. Quiet, unwavering loyalty. In a town built on backstabbing and reinvention, Paul and Robert never betrayed each other. They didn't chase the same roles. They didn't undermine one another in the press. They celebrated each other's wins. They lifted each other's spirits. And in private moments, away from the cameras, they talked about fears, about family, about growing older in a business that worships youth. Paul was more than a friend to Robert. He was a mirror. A man who held him accountable. Who saw past the movie star to the complex, restless human being underneath. He was the guy I could talk to about anything, Redford once said. We didn't have to explain ourselves. He just got it. They shared a sense of purpose, too. Both used their fame as fuel for activism, philanthropy, and pushing back against the corporate systems that tried to own them. Redford would go on to build Sundance into a haven for independent filmmakers. Newman would launch Newman's Own, giving every penny of profit to charity. They weren't just actors. They were men trying to make their success mean something. And yet, for all their public appearances and shared projects, the true depth of their friendship was largely invisible to the outside world. Because that's how they wanted it, private, sacred, and free from the machinery of Hollywood. Then, in 2008, everything changed. Paul Newman died of cancer at the age of 83. Redford was shattered. He didn't speak publicly for days. When he finally did, it wasn't as a celebrity mourning another celebrity. It was as a man grieving the loss of someone who had shaped his entire life. "There's a hole in my heart now," he said quietly. "A space that will never be filled." In the years since, Redford has spoken often of Paul. Sometimes with a smile, sometimes with a faraway look in his eyes. No matter how many honors he's received, how many films he's directed or produced, Paul's name always seems to hover nearby, like a shadow cast in the softest light. Because some friendships don't fade. They don't lose their power with time. They become part of your wiring, woven into every success, every memory, every lesson learned. To this day, Robert Redford keeps a photo of Paul in his home. Not on a pedestal, not behind glass. Just there, part of the room, like he never really left. Because in Redford's story, Paul Newman isn't a supporting character. He's a cornerstone. A force. A brother. And when Redford finally spoke of the men who left the deepest marks on his soul, Paul's name came first, not because he was famous, but because he was family. The kind of family that doesn't die with the body. The kind that lives on in every story told, every silence shared, and every time a man looks back and whispers, "You were the best of us." Fame gave Robert Redford many things: wealth, influence, legacy. But it also took things from him, slowly, painfully, without mercy. And no loss cut deeper than the one that came not from Hollywood, but from his own home. His son, James Redford, wasn't a celebrity in the traditional sense. He didn't chase the spotlight like his father. He wasn't a matinee idol or a director in the public eye. But in Robert's heart, James was everything. A son, a confidant, a mirror of his own humanity. And in the end, a ghost he still speaks to in silence. James came into the world in 1962, born into a legacy he never asked for. From the outside, people assumed the Redford name meant privilege, ease, and a life paved in opportunity. But few knew that James was born with a failing liver. Even fewer knew that by the time he reached his 30s, he would undergo 2 liver transplants, both necessary just to keep him alive. He lived in a body that betrayed him often, yet somehow managed to walk with grace, kindness, and fierce creativity. While Robert soared through movie sets and red carpets, James was often in hospital beds, grappling with a cruel and invisible battle. For a father known for playing heroes, this was the one villain he couldn't defeat. Redford once said that no role he ever played, no cowboy, no con man, no crusading journalist, was as challenging or as humbling as watching his child suffer and being powerless to stop it. But James wasn't just a patient. He was an artist. A filmmaker. A storyteller. Like his father, he had a sharp eye for truth and a soft heart for justice. His documentaries tackled environmental destruction, mental health, addiction, and political corruption, not for fame, but for change. He founded the James Redford Institute for Transplant Awareness, using his own trauma to shed light on organ donation and chronic illness. He was a fighter. But more than that, he was a light in rooms his father could never quite illuminate alone. Robert spoke about James with deep awe, not the pride of a father boasting about accomplishments, but the reverence of a man who truly admired his son's spirit. He never let illness define him, Redford once said. He lived with purpose. With empathy. With dignity. But behind that admiration was always fear. A quiet, ever-present dread that the next phone call could be the last. And on October 16, 2020, that call finally came. James had lost his battle with bile duct cancer at just 58 years old. The news broke Robert Redford in a way no role, no scandal, no film ever could. His grief wasn't public, not at first. There were no press conferences. No long interviews. Just a statement from the family asking for privacy. And then, silence. Those closest to him say Redford didn't speak for days. He walked alone through the trees near his home in Utah, staring at the sky, searching for something beyond understanding. Because how does a father process the death of a child? Especially a man who built a life telling stories about triumph, redemption, and second chances? This wasn't a story. It was a wound. Redford had seen many things in his life: war, heartbreak, betrayal. But nothing prepares a parent for outliving their child. Nothing rewires the soul quite like that. To this day, friends say James's absence hangs over Robert like a fog, quiet, constant, and filled with echoes. Every room holds memories. Every photo frame holds stillness. Every achievement now feels just a little emptier. And yet, he honors him. Not with words, but with action. Redford continues to fund environmental projects, support documentaries that tell the stories James would have wanted told, and champion the causes his son lived for. It's no longer about legacy, it's about keeping James alive in the only way he can. In rare moments, Robert has spoken softly about his loss. Not in dramatic monologues, but in fragments that pierce deeper than any scene he's acted. "He was better than me," he once whispered to a friend. Stronger. Kinder. Wiser. When asked in his later years who shaped him the most, not as an actor, but as a man, he didn't name a director, a co-star, or a critic. He named James. Because some men aren't remembered for what they leave behind, but for what they awaken in others while they're here. And in the heart of Robert Redford, there will always be a seat at the table for his son, a space no accolade or applause could ever fill. Robert Redford worked with a lot of directors. He respected many of them. He challenged some, ignored others, and outgrew a few. But there was only one who truly knew how to reach him, not just as an actor, but as a human being. That man was Sydney Pollack. A fellow artist, a visionary, and ultimately, the friend who pulled the best out of Redford both on screen and off. Their partnership wasn't just creative. It was intimate. And when Sydney died in 2008, something inside Redford quietly fractured. Their story began in the 1960s. Redford was still building his name, and Pollack was a young director hungry for meaningful work. When they first collaborated on This Property is Condemned, it was clear they had something rare. A kind of silent understanding, where words didn't have to explain what instinct already knew. Sydney didn't just direct Redford, he disarmed him. He didn't try to control the performance, he tried to understand the man behind it. That understanding deepened with Jeremiah Johnson in 1972, then The Way We Were in 1973. But it was 3 Days of the Condor and Out of Africa that cemented their legacy. These weren't just films, they were emotional explorations disguised as political thrillers and love stories. Pollack captured Redford not as a handsome Hollywood figure, but as a man wrestling with morality, loneliness, and idealism. He filmed him like a portrait. Every look, every pause, every silent moment mattered. And Redford trusted him, completely. That kind of trust is rare in Hollywood, where ego often buries collaboration. But with Sydney, it was different. He pushed Redford. He challenged his instincts. And when things got tense, they argued like brothers. Loud. Honest. Never with malice. "We were like family," Redford once said. "We fought, we laughed, we disagreed. But there was always love underneath it." They weren't just colleagues, they were each other's anchor. In a town full of flattery and fakery, Sydney told Robert the truth. He was one of the few people who could look past the icon and see the man who still sometimes doubted himself. "He knew when I was hiding," Redford confessed. "He'd call it out. He didn't let me disappear into the performance." Their connection wasn't always easy. There were years where their careers went in different directions. There were projects that didn't pan out. There were misunderstandings, long silences. But they always circled back to each other. Because real bonds aren't broken by time or distance. They're just paused. In the late 1990s, Redford wanted to direct more and act less. Pollack encouraged it. He respected Robert's need to grow, to expand. And Redford, in turn, praised Pollack's work in films like Tootsie and The Firm, where Sydney stepped in front of the camera himself. Their careers danced together, like two seasoned performers who knew the steps even when the music changed. Then came the diagnosis. Pollack was sick, cancer, aggressive and unrelenting. Redford visited him often during those final months, but the roles had reversed. The man who had once directed him through the emotional storms of so many films was now the one fading. And Redford couldn't change the ending this time. He couldn't fix it with another take, or rewrite the script. All he could do was sit beside his friend, hold his hand, and remember the moments that made them brothers. When Sydney Pollack died in May 2008, Redford didn't speak publicly for weeks. It wasn't just grief. It was emptiness. He later said that losing Pollack was like losing a limb. You keep reaching for something that's no longer there. Every time he stepped onto a film set after that, something felt off. The rhythm was gone. The air felt thinner. But he carried Sydney with him. In every quiet moment, in every film he later directed, in every hard decision he had to make without someone to lean on. Pollack wasn't just a collaborator, he was a compass. A moral center in a business that often forgets what that means. There's a photograph Redford keeps of them during the shooting of Out of Africa. They're not posing. They're just talking, smiling. Two men in their prime, unaware of the weight their work would carry decades later. Redford once said he looks at that photo when he needs guidance. Sometimes, I imagine what he'd say, he admitted. And that's usually enough. Not all great love stories are romantic. Some are built in the edit room, on long drives between locations, over coffee at sunrise before a shoot. Some are built in trust, raw, unspoken, and absolute. What Redford had with Sydney Pollack was that kind of love. And he never truly got over it. Because when a man sees your soul and still believes in your greatness, losing him doesn't end the story. It just makes it harder to finish without tears in your eyes. Before Robert Redford became the face of rugged American cinema, before the acclaim and the festivals and the golden era he helped define, there was Marlon Brando. To understand what Brando meant to Redford, you have to go back to the boy who used to sit in dark movie theaters, watching greatness flicker across the screen. To a time when acting wasn't yet a career, but a distant, unreachable dream. And on that screen, Brando wasn't acting. He was being. Wild, unpredictable, dangerous, beautiful. Redford never forgot it. Brando was the gold standard. And for a generation of young actors, he was the mountain they could never quite climb. Redford included. Even as Redford built a remarkable career of his own, even as he surpassed Brando in terms of consistency, stability, and business acumen, he always felt the shadow. Because Brando wasn't just another actor. He was myth and man in equal measure. A rebel. A poet. A storm. They didn't become friends in the traditional sense. Their relationship was more complicated than that. Redford respected him, deeply. But he also feared him. Not physically, but emotionally. Brando was chaos. Redford was control. And yet, the younger man never stopped chasing the emotional honesty that Brando could summon without warning. That rawness, that vulnerability, the kind that made audiences feel like they weren't watching a movie but witnessing something primal. Redford had it, too, but he always felt like he had to earn it the hard way. Brando just breathed it. They were never close collaborators, but their orbits crossed often. Redford would sometimes speak of Brando in interviews, never casually, always carefully. Like mentioning a ghost who still had power. And behind the praise was something else, regret. Not the kind that comes from rivalry. The kind that comes from never saying what needed to be said. Never closing the distance between admiration and connection. Once, in the 1970s, a producer floated the idea of casting Redford and Brando in the same film. Redford declined. Not because he didn't want to work with Marlon, but because he didn't think he could. There's only room for one explosion in a scene like that, he reportedly said. And I'm not the explosion. Still, Redford studied him. Quietly. From afar. He watched Brando sabotage his own success. Turn down roles that could have resurrected him. Destroy relationships. Gain weight. Lose control. And yet, even at his most self-destructive, Brando remained magnetic. Redford, ever the craftsman, tried to understand it. But maybe it was never meant to be understood. When Brando died in 2004, Redford mourned like a man who had lost something personal, even though they were never close. It wasn't grief for a friend. It was grief for a giant. For an era. For a dream of acting that Brando once made feel possible. He spoke about him in interviews with reverence, often pausing mid-sentence, as if the right words still hadn't been invented. "There's no one like him," he said once. "There never will be. He showed us what the truth could look like on camera. And we've all been chasing it ever since." But beneath that tribute was an unspoken ache. Because Redford knew that Brando had died alone, bloated, paranoid, estranged from many of the people who once loved him. He knew that Brando's brilliance came at a staggering cost. And somewhere in that knowledge was fear that greatness might always come with suffering. That maybe the highest level of artistry required a kind of self-destruction Redford had refused to allow in himself. And yet, he never stopped holding Brando up as the standard. Even decades later, when Redford had long since proven himself, had directed award-winning films, had mentored a new generation of talent through Sundance, even then, he spoke of Brando like a North Star. Flickering. Elusive. Still out of reach. Some men haunt you not because of what they did to you, but because of what they meant to you. Brando didn't hurt Redford. He didn't betray him. He didn't even really know him. But he got inside him. Through a movie screen. Through a voice. Through a presence that refused to fade. And in the quiet hours of reflection, when Robert Redford spoke of the men who shaped him, who left marks that no time could erase, Marlon Brando's name always came with a sigh. A pause. A glance into the past. Not as a peer. Not as a friend. But as a wound he learned to honor. Because sometimes, the men we can't get over are the ones we never truly knew. The ones who stood just out of reach. The ones who reminded us that no matter how high we climb, there's always someone, or something, that lives in the clouds, untouched.